Joy Hibbs. A woman had just sent her children off to school and was preparing for work when a fire suddenly erupted in her home. Firefighters managed to extinguish the flames quickly, but they soon noticed several odd details. As the investigation continued, even more puzzling clues surfaced. For more than 3 decades, the case remained a mystery, until investigators uncovered a shocking twist, the kind you'd expect to see in a detective film, that finally brought the truth to light. Joy Hibbs was born on September 23, 1955, in the small town of Chiefland, Florida. The youngest of 9 children, she grew up in a warm and close-knit family. Joy had a passion for the outdoors, spending her time hiking, fishing, and embracing all kinds of activities in nature. She also had a competitive side. During her school years, she took up running and even participated in marathons. On top of that, she was a devoted football fan who never missed a game played by her favorite team. In high school, Joy met a young man named Charlie, and the two quickly formed a connection. Not long after graduation, they tied the knot and later moved to Pennsylvania, where they settled in the small town of Croydon. Joy had always aspired to work in the medical field, but without formal training, her opportunities were limited to entry-level positions. She first worked as a veterinary assistant, but her ambitions pushed her to enroll in courses at a local college. Her dedication paid off when she earned a medical degree and secured a job as a physical therapist at a nearby clinic. By 1975, Joy and Charlie had welcomed their first child, a daughter, and 3 years later, their son was born. They moved into a quiet, pleasant neighborhood where life appeared peaceful and content. To family and friends, Joy and Charlie seemed to have built an ideal household. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. An image of the American dream. But that sense of perfection came to a tragic halt on April 19, 1991, when 35-year-old Joy was scheduled to work the evening shift. That morning, Joy got her children ready for school, said goodbye to her husband as he headed off to work, and then began preparing for her own shift. She also took care of a few errands, stopping at the grocery store and cashing a check at the bank. Around 1 p.m., her 12-year-old son David returned home from school and spotted his mother's car parked in the driveway. Excited to show her the good grades he had received, he hurried toward the house, eager for her reaction. But his excitement quickly turned into fear when he saw thick smoke pouring from inside. At first, David assumed his mother may have accidentally left something cooking on the stove. But as soon as he opened the door, he was met with flames rapidly spreading throughout the house. Overcome with panic, he tried to rush inside to reach her, but the smoke and fire forced him back. At the same time, neighbors who noticed the smoke quickly called the fire department. Firefighters arrived swiftly and were able to put out the blaze. But when they reached the final room of the house, they made a grim discovery: a human body. When paramedics and police arrived, they immediately suspected it was Joy. However, the remains were so badly burned that a positive identification couldn't be made on the spot. The body was sent to the medical examiner's office for confirmation. Meanwhile, word of the fire spread quickly through the community. Joy's daughter, who had been at school, rushed home after hearing what happened and was devastated to find her younger brother crying. Not long after, Joy's husband arrived, and when police informed him that a body had been found inside, he collapsed in shock. At that point, firefighters were still working to determine the cause of the blaze, but Joy's son couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow to blame. David had a computer in his room, with all the cords tangled and plugged into a single socket near the fish tank. Since his mother's body had been found in his bedroom, he convinced himself the fire must have started because of his carelessness, and that she had died trying to put it out. But as firefighters battled the flames, they noticed details that didn't add up. The burn patterns suggested the fire had begun in multiple parts of the house, something highly unusual for an accidental blaze. Closer inspection confirmed their suspicions. Investigators identified 4 separate ignition points. While they couldn't determine the exact method used to start the flames, one fact was undeniable: this was no accident, but arson. Even more alarming, all 4 burners on the kitchen stove had been turned on, with debris scattered across them, indicating that some kind of accelerant or material had been used to spread the fire from the stove to the rest of the house. The arson theory was soon backed up by the medical examiner's report. They confirmed the victim was Joy and revealed there were no traces of smoke in her lungs, meaning she was already dead before the fire began. But the most chilling discovery was what they found on her body. There were multiple cuts, bruises, and stab wounds. With this new information, the case was reclassified as a homicide and investigators began searching for evidence. But it wasn't easy. The fire had destroyed most of the house, leaving little to work with. On top of that, no foreign DNA was found on Joy's body. So, with no physical clues, detectives shifted their focus to identifying possible suspects. The first person they looked into was Joy's husband, Charlie. He had been at work when the fire started, but the police couldn't completely rule out the possibility that he might have left, committed the crime, and then returned to work to set up an alibi. However, there were no signs of serious marital problems. Family and friends all said the couple seemed happy, and Charlie appeared genuinely devastated by his wife's death. Despite this, detectives continued to investigate him as a potential suspect for a while, but eventually they shifted their focus on other possible leads. Investigators began questioning Joy's friends and co-workers, asking if she had any conflicts or if anyone might have had a reason to harm her. But everyone said the same thing. Joy was a kind and caring person who never got into trouble. Investigators also considered the possibility that Joy might have been a random target. From her husband, they learned that every Friday she cashed a check at the bank, and on the day of the fire, she would have had some cash. However, her wallet, which was found on the couch, was empty. Her purse also had been dumped out on the kitchen floor, as if the perpetrator was searching for something specific. Police theorized that someone might have followed her home from the bank or broken into the house intending to rob it. But this theory didn't hold much weight, because other than a relatively small amount of cash, nothing else was missing from the house. The perpetrator didn't touch any valuable items, making the robbery angle seem unlikely. So detectives began leaning toward the idea that this was a targeted attack. It wasn't long before they uncovered some unsettling details about Joy's life in the months before her death. Her family revealed a series of strange and troubling incidents that had recently taken place. On one occasion, someone threw a brick through their window. Another time, their front door was damaged and the tires on Joy's car were slashed while it was parked in front of the house. At the time, Joy and Charlie assumed these were random acts of vandalism and didn't think much of it. But now, after her murder, all of these incidents seemed connected. Police started digging into who might be behind all this and began questioning Joy's neighbors. While no one remembered seeing anything unusual around the house during these incidents, they did share something intriguing. Just before the fire started, several neighbors spotted a blue Monte Carlo parked in front of Joy's house. But unfortunately, no one got a look at the driver or the license plate. When detectives asked Joy's family about the car, they got their first big lead. Joy's son mentioned that his mom's friend, April, sometimes drove a car like that. Digging deeper, investigators learned that April and her husband Robert had lived just a few houses away from Joy, but they had recently lost their home due to financial troubles and moved away. According to Joy's friends and family, she and April had struck up a friendship shortly after April's family moved into the neighborhood. There was more to April's story, though. Neighbors described her husband Robert as a violent man with a bad temper. There were rumors that he physically abused her. Because of this, April often spent time at Joy's house along with her kids, looking for a safe space away from her home. Joy's son also told detectives about some conflict between Robert and his mother. He recalled overhearing a phone conversation where Robert not only yelled at her, but openly threatened her. Police started digging into Robert's background and quickly discovered a long rap sheet, mostly for drug-related offenses. Taking this into account, detectives began to seriously consider him as a suspect. They theorized that Robert might have harbored resentment towards Joy for supporting his wife and giving her a safe place to stay, and this anger could have escalated to murder. Police contacted the Narcotics Division, which had dealt with Robert numerous times in the past, to gather more insight into his background. The officers there agreed to assist and even offered to speak with Robert, given their familiarity with him from prior cases. However, Robert denied having anything to do with the crime. He claimed he had been out of town the entire weekend on vacation with his wife and kids. But since the murder happened on a Friday afternoon, detectives realized it was entirely possible for him to have stopped by Joy's house before heading out on the trip. Another curious detail was a fresh scratch on Robert's arm, which the officers noticed during their conversation. But despite this, Robert maintained his innocence. In the following days, Robert completely stopped cooperating with investigators, citing advice from his lawyer. When detectives attempted to persuade him to take a polygraph test, Robert refused and continued to avoid further contact with them. The police shifted their focus to finding evidence that could link Robert to the crime. Since they still hadn't found any solid leads inside the house, they returned to the neighbors who had spotted the blue car outside Joy's home and took them to Robert's residence, hoping they could identify his vehicle. But unfortunately, detectives faced another setback. Robert's Monte Carlo wasn't blue, it was black, and the neighbors said it didn't look like the car they had seen outside Joy's house. Detectives also verified Robert's alibi and established that he and his family had indeed checked into a hotel in another city on Friday, the day of the murder. Moreover, just before leaving home, Robert had been on the phone with one of his wife's friends. And this conversation took place around the same time Joy was killed. With this information, investigators began to reconsider Robert's status as the main suspect and shifted their focus back to pursuing other leads. Investigators then decided to take another look at the victim's husband, Charlie, and this time they uncovered something interesting. Speaking with Joy's co-workers, detectives learned that she had been receiving threatening phone calls. According to one co-worker, she suspected the caller might have been Joy's husband, but she never asked her about it. Despite this new information, Charlie had a solid alibi. Several co-workers confirmed he was at work on the day of the murder. However, investigators couldn't completely rule out the possibility that he might have left, committed the crime, and returned without anyone noticing. In the following months, investigators continued to question Charlie, bringing him in for several polygraph tests. But nothing in his behavior suggested he was involved in his wife's murder. Charlie had no criminal record and no history of aggressive behavior towards Joy throughout their marriage. Eventually, police concluded that his involvement was probably unlikely, and after that, the case hit a dead end. With no solid evidence or clear suspects, investigators couldn't make any progress at all, and Joy's case was basically put on hold. Occasionally, efforts were made to revisit the case, but each attempt led to a dead end. This continued for several decades. By that time, Joy's children had grown up and the lack of progress in solving their mother's murder haunted them. Her son repeatedly contacted the police, urging them to reopen a full investigation, but each communication ended in disappointment. In one conversation with detectives, they said they still considered his father Charlie responsible for the murder, but didn't have the evidence to prove it. In 2014, 23 years after the murder, the case was finally reopened. It was assigned to the cold case unit, where a fresh team of detectives started reviewing all the evidence from scratch. And it didn't take long for them to notice something odd. Detectives discovered that much of the communication with Robert, one of the primary suspects, had been handled by the narcotics division. This was not only unusual, but also unprofessional, as it involved a murder investigation. The new team struggled to understand why a completely unrelated department had been so deeply involved. The detectives decided to speak with one of the investigators who had worked on Joy's case back in 1991. At first, he refused to discuss the murder, but after multiple attempts, they managed to persuade him to answer their questions. What the retired detective revealed left them stunned. He admitted that from the very beginning, Robert seemed like the most likely suspect. However, there was one significant problem. The investigators were basically instructed to stay away from Robert and essentially drop any efforts to link him to the murder because he was an informant for the narcotics division. While it was known at the time that Robert was an informant, the detectives believed this shouldn't have interfered with a murder investigation. But as it turned out, Robert was a key informant in a massive narcotics case. The police department didn't want to jeopardize the years-long operation targeting a major drug trade business. As a result, the original investigators barely pursued Robert as a suspect, conducting only a superficial investigation into his potential involvement. These revelations marked a turning point in Joy's case, and the new team of detectives began building a case against Robert. Back in 1991, the police determined that Robert had a solid alibi. The new investigators knew they couldn't rely on outdated records. so they decided to verify everything themselves. The first step was to track down Robert's wife's friend, the one he supposedly called around the time of Joy's murder. She confirmed that the call did happen, but there was a key detail the original investigators had missed. The call wasn't in the afternoon. It was much later, closer to the evening. Next, the detectives re-interviewed the witnesses who had reportedly seen Robert with his wife and children when they checked into the hotel. According to the case files, the family arrived shortly after lunch, but the witnesses contradicted this, stating the family actually checked in around 5 p.m. So this timeline left Robert enough time to commit the murder. Finally, the investigators decided to question April. By then, she and Robert were divorced, but she still supported his alibi, insisting he couldn't have been involved in the crime. Detectives pressed her multiple times, hoping she'd reveal more, but she stuck to her original story. So, the detectives shifted their focus to uncovering new leads and re-examining all the evidence they had. This process stretched on for several years until something completely unexpected happened. In 2016, April walked into the police station and said she wanted to talk. She revealed that a series of negative events in her life had led her to reconsider her position on Joy's murder. April confessed that she had been lying about her ex-husband's alibi the entire time and that the Real story was far from what she had originally claimed. According to her, on the day of the murder, Robert came home covered in blood. When she asked him what had happened, he simply said, "I stabbed someone and set a house on fire." He then demanded that she pack up the kids for a trip. They drove to another city under the pretense of a weekend getaway. Robert also brought along a large bag. When they went for a walk in the park, he left April and the kids, disappearing into the woods. When he returned a few minutes later, the bag was gone. April realized her husband had killed Joy only a few days later when detectives came to their house. She confronted Robert and begged him to confess, but instead, he beat her and threatened to pin the crime on her if she ever spoke up. Thus, for years, April had been too afraid to testify against Robert, but she finally found the courage to take the right step. Her testimony drastically changed the direction of the case, but detectives knew they still needed some concrete evidence or a confession. So, they came up with a plan and asked April to help them prove her ex-husband's involvement. The police wired April and staged a scene where officers arrived at her house to question her. Right after that, April called Robert and told him that detectives had just asked some questions about Joy's murder and she didn't know what to do. Robert immediately insisted that she refuse to talk to the police and avoid answering any questions. His reaction didn't suggest innocence at all. Everything he said made it clear he was only trying to dodge responsibility. With this recording in hand, detectives began preparing the case for trial. This process took several years, and in May 2022, was finally arrested. He continued to deny his guilt, but the district attorney believed the chances of securing a conviction were very high. The key witness in the case was April, and things seemed to be moving steadily until another unexpected twist turned everything upside down. When Robert's son was called to testify in court, he suddenly revealed that his father had confessed to the murder. According to him, Robert called shortly after the phone conversation with his ex-wife. He said the police were questioning her about the murder and there was a chance he'd end up with a life sentence. Robert told his son he wanted to prepare him for the possibility and then began sharing details of what had happened. While he didn't outright admit to killing Joy, he used phrases like, "I think I did it." This testimony further strengthened an already solid case. The prosecution still faced one big question. What was Robert's motive? Based on the evidence, he had long been in conflict with Joy and showed a history of aggressive behavior and criminal tendencies. Investigators also suspected that Robert had taken the cash Joy withdrew from the bank just hours before her death. But there was an even darker possibility. When the case resurfaced in the news years later, relatives of Robert from another state reached out to detectives. Though they hadn't spoken to him in years, they were stunned when they saw Joy's photograph in the coverage. They revealed that as a teenager, Robert had sexually assaulted and violently attacked his own aunt, who happened to look strikingly similar to Joy. This revelation pushed detectives to consider that Robert's motive might have been to assault Joy. However, by the time this theory surfaced, proving it was no longer possible. Even so, the jury ultimately convicted Robert of Joy's murder, sentencing him to life in prison. While this finally brought justice, The circumstances of the case left many outraged. For more than 30 years, Robert had walked free, not because evidence was lacking, but because police had chosen to protect a narcotics investigation instead of fully pursuing Joy's case. In effect, her life had been treated as less important than a drug trafficking operation. Still, Joy's family expressed deep gratitude to the new team of detectives who worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. For her son in particular, the verdict brought long-awaited relief. After years of wondering whether his father might have been involved, a suspicion planted by the original investigators, he was finally able to know with certainty what had really happened. Moving on to the next case. Kenny Ong Lake Yong. You have to admit, death can sometimes be waiting around any corner, striking in places we'd least expect. No one can truly predict where that encounter might happen, inside a cozy home, on a dark and lonely street, or, though it may sound unbelievable to many, even during a family dinner. Yet, as with every rule, there are exceptions. The story of Kenny Ong is one of those rare and shocking exceptions. Is such a thing really possible? How could a simple family dinner end in a brutal murder? One so disturbing that it shook Malaysia to its core and even pushed authorities to review existing laws. Let's take a closer look. The woman at the center of this case was Kenny Ong Lake Yong. Born in 1974 in the Malaysian city of Ipoh, she grew up in a large family. Although her hometown was considered a charming destination for tourists, Kenny longed for something more: a prestigious career, the chance to travel, and all the ambitions any young woman might dream of. She knew, however, that those dreams wouldn't simply fall into her lap. She would have to work hard to make them happen. First, Kenny graduated from high school with a gold medal. Afterward, she pursued higher education abroad, enrolling at a university in Hawaii, where she earned a degree in economics. Kenny had laid the foundation for her future, but she knew she had to keep moving forward. Independent and ambitious, she relocated to Los Angeles, where she found work at an advertising agency. The bustling city of dreams gave her the opportunity to thrive and prove herself as a professional in her field. It was there, in 2001, that she met Brandon Ong. Like Kenny's father, Brandon had been born in Singapore, but he had emigrated to the United States with his family as a child and was now firmly established as an American. The two quickly fell in love, married, and eventually settled in the nearby city of San Diego. But just 2 years into their marriage, tragedy struck. Kenny's father was diagnosed with liver cancer and required major surgery in Malaysia. The outcome was uncertain, and his survival was far from guaranteed. Without hesitation, Kenny packed her bags and, on June 1st, left her husband behind in America to be by her father's side. Thankfully, the operation was a success. The illness receded, and doctors reassured the family that Jen, as Kenny's father was affectionately known, had many more years ahead of him and would surely live to see grandchildren. Relieved, Kenny finally allowed herself to breathe again. At last, things seemed to return to normal, and Kenny was ready to reunite with her beloved husband and get back to the career she loved. She boarded a morning flight to Los Angeles and, that same evening, invited her extended family to a farewell dinner at their favorite restaurant, Montes, a place filled with warm memories from her childhood. During the meal, Kenny's mother began to feel unwell. Always attentive and caring, Kenny offered to drive her home. Out in the parking lot, she searched through her purse for the parking ticket but couldn't find it. Thinking she must have left it in the car, she asked her sisters to stay with their mother while she ran off to retrieve it. Minutes passed, then more. Kenny's mother eventually tried to head toward the car herself, but when she reached the lot, both Kenny and her vehicle were gone. Alarmed, one of the sisters began calling her phone, only to find it switched off. That was when panic set in. Kenny's family knew her well, and they were certain of one thing: she would never simply vanish. And even if something had happened, she was sure to call and warn her family. But what could have happened in a closed parking lot, literally 300 feet from her family? Kenny's father went to the security guards and asked them to show the security footage. At first, there was nothing strange. His daughter walking toward the car, checking her pockets, looking in her purse for her keys. But then they noticed that behind Kenny there was a stranger moving behind him, and like Kenny, he was slowing down and speeding up. Already from another camera, the guards together with the worried father watched Kenny's car leaving the parking lot. But behind the wheel was a man, most likely the one who followed her in the parking lot. But Kenny herself, strangely enough, was sitting in the passenger seat. It all looked like a kidnapping, and the family immediately called the police. It should be given credit. The Malaysian police began the search for the missing woman as soon as they received information on the stolen car, and in a couple of hours, one of the highway patrol noticed a car on the road, which matched the description. In order not to frighten the possible perpetrator, and at the time they did not fully understand whether it was a kidnapping or not, the police patrol stopped the car to check the documents. The car stopped. The driver was visibly nervous, but still with a smile gave the policeman his license. And Kenny, who was sitting next to him, tried to give the policeman some signs, but he was checking the driver's documents. Unfortunately, he did not understand it, but the kidnapper paid attention to it, and he pressed the gas pedal to the floor and drove away from the patrol car. The police tried to shoot at the trail, but to no avail. The car fled, but they still had the documents of the kidnapper, 27-year-old Ahmad Najib bin Aris. Let me tell you a brief biography of this guy. Ahmad was born in 1976 and grew up in Moore, Malaysia. He was the second of 4 siblings in the family. Ahmad Najib studied until the 3rd year of secondary school before dropping out, not continuing the last 2 years of secondary education. Secondary education in Malaysia lasts 5 years because he had to work to feed his family and was a hard worker. In 1998, he came from Moore to Kuala Lumpur. Later, Ahmad Najib was married and had 2 children. According to people who knew him, Ahmad Najib was a man of good character and responsible in his work. And now back to our case. After a while, it turned out that the shooting at the car did not go without result. A young man approached the police and told a strange story. He said that during dinner at a roadside cafe, an unknown guy approached him and said that he was going on vacation with his wife, but on the road he punctured a tire and now they could not go further. The young man gladly decided to help the stranger. They went outside. He took a jack out of the trunk, gave it to the traveler, but he noticed bullet marks on the car, and on the front seat he saw a frightened woman, hardly looking like a wife going on a carefree vacation with her beloved husband. The so-called husband himself did not change the tire but only fiddled with the jack for a while, grumbled, and gave it back. The police immediately realized that it was Kenny and her kidnapper was Ahmad. However, that was the last time Kenny was seen alive. Kenny Ong, or rather her body, would be found only 3 days later in a sewer manhole near a construction site, almost burned to the ground. As the autopsy will show, the woman was first stabbed in the stomach several times, and later strangled. Also, not far from the construction site, will be found in Kenny's car, with a punctured or rather shot tire and with blood stains on the back seat. The police, who had the killer's documents in their possession, for some reason decided to go to the address where Ahmad lived only after the body was found. The amazing thing about this story is that the killer was at home and living a very ordinary life, as if nothing had happened, as if he had not stolen someone else's car, as if he had not kidnapped a woman who had come to visit her father during his illness, and finally, as if he had not driven away from the police officers who were shooting at him. Later, after Ahmad's arrest, forensic tests would prove that in addition to Kenny's blood, Ahmad's own DNA was in the car. We would like to clarify that in Malaysia, murders, especially such brutal ones, are extremely rare. The point is that according to the criminal code, a murderer is entitled to the highest punishment, not even life imprisonment, but the death penalty. It is unclear what Ahmad hoped for, knowing that the police have all the data on him, but he confessed everything and even decided to help the investigation, counting on the fact that it will save him from death. Naturally, the brutal criminal put on the mask of an innocent sheep at the trial. He said that that night in the parking lot, he was looking for a completely different woman, but mistaken and realized it only when he was riding with Kenny in the car. According to him, they even laughed together about the situation, and later he tried to get her to have sex with him. And again, according to him, Kenny was not even against it. And the strangulation marks on her neck were just part of the woman's sexual fantasy, which is why she died. A terrified Ahmad decided to dispose of the body and set Kenny on fire. This story was made up from start to finish by Ahmad's lawyers, because in such a case he would have been awarded only abuse of the deceased or at worst negligent homicide, given that Kenny had asked to be strangled herself during the intimate encounter. And supposedly, if this is not true, if all this is just a fantasy of the defendant, then why the captive did not run away while her captor was changing the tire. The lawyers said such a version could sound even convincing if it were not for the stab wounds in the abdomen. It was at this point that the whole defense fell apart like a house of cards. It was obvious because the investigation had a different, more reliable autopsy-confirmed view of what had happened. Ahmad saw a lone woman in the parking lot outside Monty's restaurant and followed her. When Kenny opened her car, he threatened her with a knife, ordered her into the passenger seat, and got behind the wheel himself. After that encounter with police officers and a failed attempt to replace a blown tire, he drove the car to a deserted location, put a terrified Kenny in the back seat, and used her several times. Kenny tried to resist, for which she was stabbed several times in the stomach and later strangled with a coat belt. After the abuse, Ahmad took her already dead body outside and threw it into the first manhole, covering it with tires so that it would not be found. He returned to this manhole the next day with several canisters of gasoline and decided to finally hide the traces of the crime, filled Kenny's body with gasoline, and set it on fire. In addition, as it turned out later, Ahmad had 4 rapes against women who fortunately did not die, but still fearing conviction, did not file a police report. Finally, on February 23, 2005, the court, for some reason lasting for several years, finally sentenced the murderer and, among other things, gave Ahmad 10 lashes. But did this make it any easier for the parents who had lost their daughter forever? Being behind bars, Ahmad tried to appeal his sentence and even wrote a letter to Salanger, the head of state, asking him to pardon him. But of course, he was refused. And only 13 years after Kenny's murder, Ahmad got what he deserved. On September 23, 2016, Ahmad was executed by hanging in his prison cell. As I mentioned earlier, the case drew significant attention across Malaysia. What unsettled the public was not only the brutality of the murder or Ahmad's chilling confidence that he would never be punished, but also the terrifying realization of how easy it was to abduct someone in a busy shopping center, even from a parking lot. In response, Malaysian authorities took sweeping measures to prevent such tragedies in the future. They began installing more CCTV cameras throughout the country, increased the presence of security guards in shopping centers, and even designated parking areas specifically for women. Yet, it remains heartbreaking that such changes came at the cost of an innocent woman's life. A woman who had traveled tens of thousands of miles just to spend 2 short weeks with her ailing father. Moving on to the next case. Liga Skromane. India stands apart as the only country where cultural and religious traditions have continued unbroken since ancient times, making it a destination that draws visitors from around the world. Yet, in this story, India is seen like a coin with 2 very different sides. On the morning of April 20th, 2018, at sunrise, 2 young men set out to fish along a river that led into a mangrove forest. They traveled a long distance downstream before reaching a secluded and quiet spot. As one of them jumped into the water to secure their boat, he was suddenly struck by a sharp, acrid smell lingering nearby. Following the unsettling odor, they went ashore, unaware of the grim discovery awaiting them. What they found was horrifying, a human-like body hanging from a tree branch, with a skull resting on the ground nearby. The men quickly abandoned their boat and hurried to the nearest village to report what they had discovered. Soon after, a team of investigators, forensic specialists, and police officers arrived at the scene. Experts confirmed that the body hanging from the tree was human. It was clear that it had been there for quite some time, already in an advanced state of decomposition. The victim's arms and legs had begun to lose flesh, and the skull was discovered lying nearby. Scattered close to the body were cigarette packs, bottled drinking water, and a lighter, likely belongings of the deceased. That very morning, investigators collected all available evidence, and the remains were sent for forensic examination. The few pieces of clothing left on the body were also documented as part of the case. Liga Skromane, a 33-year-old hiker, tragically became the victim of a fatal incident. But who was she, and what led to her fate on the riverbank? Born in Latvia in 1986, Liga Skromane grew up in a warm, close-knit family with an older brother and a younger sister. She and her sister were especially close, sharing both joys and struggles throughout their childhood. Later in life, Liga moved to Ireland but always kept strong ties with her family back home. It was in Ireland that she met Andrew Jordan. Their relationship didn't begin with instant chemistry. Liga, being shy and reserved, found it hard to connect with new people at first. Yet, over the course of 5 years, their bond deepened, and they eventually married, full of dreams for the future. Though Liga worked at a hotel and lived a humble life, she nurtured a bigger vision, one day opening her own yoga retreat center in Portugal. Andrew wholeheartedly supported Liga's dream, and the couple spent 4 years carefully saving to make it a reality. But destiny took a different course. In early 2018, Liga began suffering from an aggravated skin condition that brought not only physical pain, but also emotional distress. Hoping to help her heal both body and mind, her sister Ilza suggested they take a restorative trip together. In February 2018, the sisters traveled to Trivandrum, the capital of Kerala, where Liga sought Ayurvedic treatment for depression. They stayed in Kovalam, Kerala's premier Ayurvedic destination. The village, its name meaning grove of coconut palms in Hindi, offered a peaceful setting with all the essentials for relaxation, recovery, and holistic care. Ayurveda is the oldest system of medical knowledge, which originated more than 5,000 years ago. Ayurveda is based on the universal laws of nature, on the unity of all things in this world. Ayurvedic programs help a person to restore balance and harmony in the body. Panchakarma is the best Ayurvedic program for modern man in Kerala. Panchakarma helps to reboot the body effectively. Most of those who have undergone the Panchakarma course in Kerala repeat it annually, and it is not without reason, as regular Panchakarma not only allows us to get rid of extra pounds, but also adds a couple of decades of healthy life. Since 1985, Ayurveda has been recognized by the World Health Organization as the most effective system of alternative medicine in the world. Let us emphasize that all the promised benefits of Ayurveda are only an alternative, not a panacea for healthy longevity. The 33-year-old Liga and her sister came to Kerala in search of spiritual enlightenment, hoping to be cured of depression in one of the Ayurveda centers. Their treatment tour was scheduled for 6 weeks and included yoga classes, meditation, therapeutic herbal drinks, and nutritional and massage recommendations. The sisters were treated together at an Ayurvedic clinic at Kovalam in Kerala and have already completed their course. On the morning of March 14th, Liga refused to go to yoga class with her sister, explaining that she had a headache. When Ilza returned to her room, Liga was not there. With the help of the hotel staff, Ilza was able to find out that her sister left the hotel around 11:30 a.m. wearing leggings and a yoga t-shirt, hired an auto rickshaw, and went to Kovalam Beach for a walk. The beaches around Kovalam are popular destinations for both domestic and international travelers. The sandy beaches of Kovalam are always crowded. However, Liga could not be found there. Ilza wandered the beach until late at night, showing her sister's picture. Never heard the long-awaited response that someone had seen her. This was actually strange, as Liga was a tall white girl who definitely stood out, and if she was actually on the beach, someone should have seen her. After searching unsuccessfully, Ilza went to the police station to report her sister missing. However, the Indian police officers did not show any sympathy for the missing foreign tourist, but on the contrary, complacently asserted that they would surely find the girl who had strayed or she would surely return the next day. They were not even deterred by the fact that Liga, according to her sister, had psychological problems and could be an easy target for criminals. The potent cod police registered a case, but the investigation started coldly, or rather it is more correct to say did not start at all. Liga Skromane had traveled extensively in Kerala. She had been to Kollam, Verkala, and finally came to Kovalam. She considered herself a very experienced traveler in India, and this time she took her sister with her to show her the India she loved so much. But the trip turned tragic. After a few days of inaction by the Indian police, Ilza started searching on her own. She enlisted the help of friends and also reported Liga missing to her husband. Andrew flew urgently to India. The police investigation intensified after the missing person's husband, Andrew Jordan, and Ilza contacted the local press and started an online campaign to find her. Ilza also reached out via Twitter to India's Foreign Minister, Sushma Swaraj. "Please help. My sister, a Latvian citizen, has been missing for 8 days. We are very worried," she wrote. The desperate sister announced a reward of 100,000 rupees to anyone who could help find Liga or provide any information about her movements that day. Ilza and her friend Alexa, who had also traveled to India after hearing about Liga's disappearance, put up posters in the Kovalam beach area where Liga was last seen. Together, they put up flyers and distributed them to people. Numerous locals took an active part in the search for the missing tourist. The important fact remained that Liga suffered from depression and had a hard time interacting with strangers. On the day of her disappearance, she hired an auto rickshaw to reach the beach and was never seen again. She had about 1,000 rupees with her, but no passport, so she could not leave the country. Ashok Kumar, head of the local police station, said that the police had no leads in the case. The police kept saying that the tourist had gone on a bender or eloped, and would soon return on her own. However, regular, persistent requests for help from Ilza and Andrew forced the police to search for Liga. The search operation was conducted in the Kovalam beach area where Liga Skromane was last seen. Police assumed that she had drowned just as the unidentified body of a woman was found washed ashore at Kalakal in Kanyakumari district. Investigators examined the body along with the missing woman's sister, but the latter did not identify it as her sister. The version of drowning was not confirmed and the search for Liga continued. Andrew, on the other hand, was convinced that his wife had been kidnapped by local gangs for the purpose of selling her. He tried to infiltrate these gangs to get more information, but was exposed and warned that repeated contact with the gangs would result in him having to leave the country. A month after Liga went missing, there are still no leads to help find the girl. Ilza continued to look for her sister. She visited Kovalam beach every day and watched people. On one such day, she spotted a boat and she had a theory. The only way to leave or leave the beach unnoticed was the boat. On April 17, 2018, after a forced hiatus, Andrew returned to India to continue his search. Ilza and Andrew entered a new struggle to find the Skromane League. The body was still not found. The search was complicated by the fact that Liga Skromane was a tourist and a citizen of another country. The Latvian Foreign Ministry said the embassy was in constant contact with Liga's relatives and was also working closely with the Indian police. The Latvian embassy also appealed to the Indian Foreign Ministry with a request for special support in the search for Liga, as well as the Honorary Consul of Latvia in India, whose consular district includes the region where Liga disappeared. At the request of the Kerala state government, the Indian Navy and Air Force will search for missing Latvian citizen Liga Skromane. The search operation involved and 32 transport plane, Gemini inflatable boats, underwater sonar, and 5 deep-sea divers. But even this search operation did not bring the desired result, and Liga was still not found. The search continued. By this time, all local residents knew about the missing tourist from Latvia. They supported and sympathized with Andrew and Ilza. On April 20th, 2018, Ilza's phone received the longest-awaited, yet most horrific call of her life. A body had been found in the mangrove jungle. She and Andrew drove to the designated spot, where the police were waiting for them for the boat crossing. Ilza's heart was pounding like never before. She felt that for the moment, she would have to swim the path that the League had traveled to its demise. On the spot, horror overwhelmed her. Ilza saw her sister's clothes. The shirt and leggings on the body were recognized by Ilza, but the jacket and shoes did not belong to Liga. It remained unclear how, with whom, and why Liga had gotten to a place that could only be accessed by going through Panatura from Samudra Beach. 2 women confirmed that they had witnessed Liga traveling alone into the mangrove forest. But why would a girl who is being treated for depression and is already alone take a boat to a remote place in the forest? The body was shifted to the medical college hospital where it underwent an autopsy, which was captured on video camera. The police said they could not confirm the identity of the body until DNA analysis was completed. According to the city police commissioner, the body was badly mutilated with a head lying nearby. Police have tentatively identified the dead woman as missing tourist Liga Skromane. In favor of the investigators' conclusions is also the fact that the victim was identified by Liga's relatives by her hair and clothes. One of the versions of rescue services in India was poisoning. There are poisonous pong trees in the mangrove forest, and she could have accidentally or intentionally eaten their fruit and poisoned herself. Between 1989 and 1999, more than 500 people died from poisoning by its fruits in Kerala alone. It looked like another nonsense, because the person was hanging upside down, but there was no head. It is obvious that if Liga was poisoned, her body would have been in a completely different position. The head would have been in place. The Indian authorities were talking utter nonsense. Based on the information about Liga's complex psychological problem, the investigators also assumed the version that Liga had voluntarily left her life. Ilse feared that the police would try to pass off her sister's murder as a voluntary departure from life. Although a rope had been found at the scene, and it could be concluded that the hiker had hanged herself, Ilse demanded a separate explanation for the missing head. "Don't tell me it's lost," Ilse said sarcastically in yet another appeal on the internet. Breathlessly, Ilse and the anxious public waited for the results of the forensic tests. The forensic results were overwhelming. The forensic report stated that there were areas of blood pooling in part of Liga Skromane's brain, as well as bruising in the neck area. The autopsy revealed that the woman had been strangled by several people. She was killed in an attempted violent attack. There were external injuries on the body, probably sustained during the struggle. The fact of violence could not be confirmed as the body was in the decomposition stage. There were characteristic injuries on the cartilage in her throat, which indicated that someone had squeezed her throat with force. The trauma was severe enough to be fatal. According to forensic experts, there were blood clots in her brain, which confirmed strangulation. They also noted that there were bruises on her neck and legs. A total of 9 wounds were recorded on Liga Skromane's body. In view of the above, the police no longer considered the version of voluntary death. According to the autopsy, it was determined that Liga was murdered. Liga died after resisting or struggling. Ilse breathed a sigh of relief and hoped that the police would soon find her sister's killers. But there were complications as well. As part of the investigation, the police began checking out local drug dealers and card players. In addition, during interviews with local residents, 2 women said that they saw Liga walking alone to the place where her body was later found. But the police said they did not fully trust their words. Meanwhile, Liga's relatives have accused Indian police of incompetence, claiming that if the girl had been searched for immediately, the tragedy could have been avoided. The 33-year-old Latvian tourist is believed to have been grabbed from a nearby beach and transported by boat before being strangled. A special team of investigators has begun looking for those responsible for the crime. About 40 suspects were interviewed. However, arrests were planned to be made a few days later, after the law enforcers had enough evidence. The Indian police conducted an investigation that led to the arrest of 2 men who were eventually accused of killing Liga Skromane. Police revealed that Liga Skromane was lured by 2 men who then abused her before dismembering her body. The alleged assailants, who are now in custody, are local dealers in illegal substances. The suspects fully confessed under torture. Both the accused were pimps and were also dealing in illegal substances. Police said the autopsy did not reveal much evidence because Liga's body was badly decomposed. Andrew Jordan filed a petition in Superior Court calling for a review of the felony murder case. He believed that more people were involved in the woman's murder. In the petition, he pointed out that both defendants later recanted their pleas of guilty to the crime. According to Jordan, the men may have confessed because they were tortured, which as it turns out is a common practice in India. However, the Supreme Court of India denied the murdered woman's common-law husband, Liga Skromane, a review of the case. Due to lack of direct evidence, the trial was postponed for 2 months. But Andrew was outraged by this attitude of the authorities. He had earlier accused the Kerala authorities and police of incompetence and attempts to cover up Leia's murder, so as not to scare away tourists. Both the suspects' lawyers asked for and got a postponement. By law, they have the right to postpone the case once without giving any reason. The more they postponed, the more he was convinced the case was unclean. However, both suspects were in custody. Investigation revealed that 32-year-old Umesh and 28-year-old Adyakumar offered Liga Skromane weed, and when she was drugged, they used it and then strangled and decapitated her. It is noted that the 2 men apprehended for the murder of Liga Skromane and had previously committed similar crimes on numerous occasions. Both of them worked for a food delivery company in the Kerala capital and earned money as illegal tour guides in their spare time. Umesh and Udyan have been charged with destruction of evidence, murder, poisoning, kidnapping, and rape. The place where Liga's corpse was found and had earlier served as a pleasure ground for Umesh he used to take men there. 13 criminal cases have been filed against him, including 6 for sexual assault and 1 for attempted murder. Several of Umesh's victims have testified against him. Liga Skromane, along with both men, were seen in the area by several people. They were initially silent, but confessed to everything after the body was found. The suspects eventually admitted to police that they killed Liga Skromane during an attempted assault. Although they were initially arrested claiming they had only seen her in Kovalam, repeated questioning led to their full confession. On December 6, 2022, the court sentenced both men to life imprisonment. In addition, the court ordered each of them to pay 165,000 rupees in compensation to Liga's sister, Ilza. It is worth noting that similar crimes have become increasingly common in the country. Young women continue to face frequent violence, highlighting the severity of India's crime problem. In response to the alarming rise in sexual offenses against minors, the government has even introduced the death penalty as a deterrent. It should also be noted that without the persistence of Liga's relatives, especially her sister, who brought media attention through a press conference and the support of a prominent MP, the case might never have been properly investigated. Initially, police suggested that Liga may have died voluntarily, and it has since come to light that similar incidents had occurred in the same area where her body was found. This case serves as a reminder and a warning, particularly to women, about the risks of traveling alone in India. One should not underestimate the dangers of seeking spiritual enlightenment in distant, unfamiliar, and potentially unsafe places. Protecting one's safety must always come first. Moving on to the next case. Salma Montes. Why did a young student have to lose her life? Today's story, known widely as the Salma Montes case, unfolded in Mexico just a few years ago. The victim was a 22-year-old law student whose only crime was breaking off an engagement with her abusive fiancé. For this decision, she paid the ultimate price, brutally murdered by the very man she left, who, bolstered by the support of those around him, believed he could act without facing justice. In a cruel twist of fate, Salma had been studying law with a focus on crimes against women. So, who was Salma Montes? Born on November 18, 1996, in the small town of Delicias in Chihuahua, northern Mexico, she was given the full name Salma Yaira Montes Soto at birth. Salma was the youngest of two daughters, growing up alongside her older sister, Karen. Their father, Gabriel, tragically passed away from a heart attack when Salma was just 4 years old and Karen was 8. From that moment on, their mother, Soledad, raised the girls on her own. She never remarried, choosing instead to dedicate her life to her daughters, making sure they lacked nothing and were always cared for. From an early age, Salma was known as a warm, sociable, and compassionate girl with many friends. She loved animals and was always ready to help anyone in need. People often described her as a petite brunette with a radiant smile, striking eyes, and a gentle spirit. During childhood play with her sister, she once fell from a swing and split her eyebrow, leaving a small crescent-shaped scar. Far from diminishing her beauty, it became a unique feature that made her even more memorable. As a teenager, Salma, like many of her peers, chose to express herself with a few small tattoos that she felt represented her inner world and emotions. Though her mother held more traditional views, she did not oppose her younger daughter's desire for self-expression. Salma performed well in school, though she wasn't at the very top of her class. Her dream was to pursue higher education, but with limited family finances, she knew affording university tuition would be difficult. Determined, she worked hard to earn a scholarship, and despite the challenges, she succeeded, gaining admission to the prestigious National Autonomous University of Mexico. There, she chose to study law with a specialization in crimes against women. It was during her university years, in 2006, that the 20-year-old student met a young man named Kevin Gualberto Pilcaster. Kevin was 5 years older than Salma. At the time, he worked as a cook in a local catering business and dreamed of one day becoming a successful restaurateur. Before that, he had started his career in the family's butcher shop, where he learned to cut cattle carcasses. Outwardly, Kevin was charming, pleasant, well-groomed, and courteous. He knew how to present himself, and to Salma, he seemed like a reliable, good-hearted young man. What began as friendly communication between them soon developed into romance. The 5-year age gap didn't pose a problem, and within a year the couple became officially engaged. Kevin's family welcomed Salma warmly, despite her more modest background. They believed her presence was beneficial to Kevin, who seemed to radiate happiness when she was around. Yet, behind this picture of harmony lay a troubling truth, one that the Pillcaster family preferred not to speak about. Kevin struggled with bursts of uncontrollable aggression, and anyone near him during those moments often became the unfortunate target of his violent temper. After their engagement, Kevin appeared outwardly calmer and more composed, but Salma's mother, Soledad, and her sister, Karen, were uneasy about the match. They noticed troubling changes in Salma's behavior that deeply worried them. Once lively, sociable, and always smiling, she became withdrawn, tearful, and spent much of her time shut away in her room. Despite their concerns, Salma insisted she was fine, doing her best to reassure them. Over time, however, bruises began to appear on her face and body, injuries she tried to conceal and never explained, always avoiding direct questions. When she accepted Kevin's marriage proposal, her family was devastated. They pleaded with her not to tie her life to a man who was clearly abusive, but Salma, blinded by love, clung to the belief that he would eventually change for the better. As time went on, Kevin's temper worsened. He became increasingly volatile, possessive, and controlling. His jealousy bordered on obsession. He forbade her from interacting with male classmates, demanded she limit her social circle, and required constant updates on her whereabouts. Salma, caught between fear and affection, endured his escalating abuse, hoping in vain that love would transform him. On this ground, the couple constantly quarreled, and the young man often put his fists into action. At the end of March 2019, after another major quarrel, which ended in manhandling, Salma broke off the engagement just a couple of months before the planned wedding. For her fiancé, it turned out to be a terrible blow, but not because he loved the girl, was very worried about it, and wanted to fix everything, but because he took the deed of the chosen one as a personal insult. First time Kevin tried to return the bride, but he did it in an ultimatum and orderly form. When he realized that she did not want to see him anymore, he suddenly changed tactics. He again became courteous and polite, as at the beginning of their relationship, offered the former lover to remain friends and continue to communicate. A couple of weeks after the breakup, the young people finally calmly talked and seemed to have figured everything out. Salma at the time was actively preparing for the defense of the diploma, had an internship, and was too busy studying and therefore about the conflict with her former fiancé and broken engagement almost did not think. When on May 31st, Salma unexpectedly called Kevin and proposed to meet. She did not think it strange or suspicious, and she agreed. They agreed to see each other that evening in the parking lot outside the local Natural History Museum on the northeast side of town. The guy worked near the place and often left his car there. After school, Salma was given a ride to the building by a close friend of hers named Violet. Since it was Friday night, they said goodbye until Monday, agreeing to go to the library together that day to study. There was a Ford Transit van in the parking lot, which belonged to Kevin's parents and which he himself used as his work vehicle. The young man was supposed to show up any minute, so Salma headed for the car while her friend went home. Salma has not been seen alive since. Disappearance of a student. When Salma did not return home in the evening, her mother and sister sounded the alarm. She always warned her loved ones if she was going to stay out late or spend the night at a friend's house. About the planned meeting with Kevin, Soledad and Karen did not even guess because Salma, not wanting to upset them, hid it from them. The student's cell phone was turned off, and after several hours of unsuccessful attempts to reach her, her mother and sister began to call her friends, but they could not help. When the relatives contacted Violet, she said that Salma was going to meet her ex-fiancé, and she drove her to the meeting. At this point, the women realized that something terrible had happened, and it was time to sound the alarm. They immediately, right in the middle of the night, went to the police station where they reported the disappearance of Salma, as well as their terrible guesses about what might have happened. Law enforcers took the statement of the concerned women seriously and quickly began searching for the missing student. The first thing was question Violet, who last saw Salma. She confirmed that she took her friend to meet her ex-fiancé, and they said goodbye in the parking lot, and a couple of hours later Salma Montes' phone was turned off and unavailable. Kevin, who was visited by the police in the morning, said he saw his ex-fiancée in the parking lot. They talked for a while and went their separate ways. It was obvious that the guy was not telling us something, but he had nothing to show for it. Less than 24 hours had passed since Salma's disappearance, and there was still hope that she would soon turn up alive and unharmed. And there were no good reasons for detention, searches, and interrogations. So the investigators limited themselves to talking outside the station and collecting testimony. Salma's friends, fellow students, and relatives took an active part in the search for her. They pasted flyers with her photos around the city, created posts on social networks, through which they asked to share any relevant information about Salma's whereabouts. The missing person was described as a petite, skinny brunette with light skin and brown eyes. Among the special features mentioned were her tattoos, 3 hearts on her stomach and musical notes on her right arm, as well as a small scar above her eyebrow. She was carrying a cloth backpack with textbooks, notes, and a student ID card, which she always carried with her. A grisly find on the banks of the canal. On June 7, 2019, a badly disfigured and decomposed human body was found on the bank of a canal miles away from the interstate highway, the appearance of which was literally shocking. The hands were missing, the skin had been stripped off in places, the hair had been burned off, and the face had been mutilated beyond recognition. In addition, all teeth had been removed and no personal belongings or clothing could be found. According to preliminary reports, the cause of death was a deep wound in the neck, inflicted by the precise blow of a sharp knife. As a result of this action, the carotid artery was damaged and the girl literally bled to death in a couple of minutes, and all other injuries were inflicted posthumously. Obviously, the perpetrator did everything possible to make the body unrecognizable, either by fingerprints, dental records, or any special features or external data. Experts only agreed that it was a young girl aged 25 years old, and it was immediately suggested that the body belongs to Salma Montes, who disappeared a week ago and whose story was actively replicated in the press. The mother and sister of the girl were invited to the identification, but they could not recognize their relative in the disfigured corpse. The women simply refused to believe that someone could have treated the kind-hearted and sympathetic Salma so cruelly. In order to unambiguously identify the identity of the victim, required an expensive DNA examination. However, the Montes family had no money for such research, so the test was conducted by a state laboratory, whose equipment left much to be desired, and the probability of error or inaccuracy was quite high. Unfortunately, the results of the examination confirmed that the mutilated body found did indeed belong to the missing student. However, the grief-stricken relatives of the girl still refused to believe it and announced on social networks to raise funds for a second examination in a private laboratory with more accurate and modern equipment. Hundreds of concerned people responded to their request, and the necessary amount of money was collected quickly enough. But, alas, the retest only confirmed the results of the previous one. It was Salma, the only suspect. Relatives and close friends of the deceased in one voice claimed that she had no enemies or ill-wishers, but at the same time almost all mentioned her troubled relationship with Kevin Pilcaster, with whom she broke off her engagement about a month before her disappearance. Salma's mother and sister claimed that her ex-fiancé abused and beat her, which is why she decided to break up with him. It would seem that this guy should have been the main, if not the only, suspect from the beginning. But until the body was identified, he remained at large in his house. Car and personal belongings were not searched, which gave him a great opportunity to get rid of the evidence. Only 2 weeks after Salma's disappearance and a week after the discovery of her body, Kevin was taken into custody on charges of kidnapping and brutalizing his former fiancée. The young man himself categorically denied his guilt, although he agreed to cooperate with the investigation. However, his testimony has largely changed. The new version and found evidence. In the opinion of forensic experts, an experienced butcher or surgeon worked on the body of the girl. The hands were separated from the body with precise cuts on the joints, which spoke of a good knowledge of anatomy. The skin was also expertly and skillfully removed. As it turned out, the perpetrator removed it in places where there were tattoos, as well as noticeable birthmarks in order to eliminate the possibility of identifying the body by them. Since Kevin had worked as a butcher in the past and had extensive experience in cutting carcasses, the prosecution tried to cling to this thread. But the defendant's lawyers insisted that it was a mere coincidence, and this circumstance could not be used in court as evidence of their client's involvement in the case. According to the new version told by Pilcaster after his arrest, that evening, They actually met with his ex-fiancée in a parking lot near his work. They were just talking when suddenly another guy approached them, who, according to Kevin, was Salma's new boyfriend. Allegedly, this guy was jealous of the girl's former fiancée and punched her in the face with a swing. But the defendant stood up for Salma. He told her to take shelter in his van, and he himself decided to deal with the offender in a manly manner. However, the fight had barely started when Salma jumped out of the van and begged Kevin not to hurt her boyfriend. After that, Salma and the stranger left and Pilcaster went home. The defendant's parents and grandmother, who were called as witnesses, claimed that he returned home at midnight, changed his clothes, and went out with his new girlfriend named Consuela. Soon the girl herself showed up at the station to confirm Kevin's alibi, saying that on that fateful night he was with her, could not have committed the crime, and then cover his tracks. The van in which the suspect was traveling was seized, and inside the vehicle was found washed-up traces of blood belonging to the deceased. In response, the young man claimed that Salma had gotten a nosebleed after a jealous boyfriend punched her, and she probably left a trail when she hid in the van while the men worked things out. However, according to Salma's family and friends, no new boyfriend has appeared for her since her breakup with her fiancé copyright. She was completely absorbed in her studies, wrote a diploma, and preparing for his defense. By the way, to find this mysterious boyfriend, which Kevin could not even thickly describe, and failed, most likely because he made him up. Despite the new details and Consuela, who came out of nowhere to confirm the alibi of the accused, the whole story looked very strange and unreliable. Nevertheless, the court found that the evidence presented by the prosecution was insufficient to convict. Pilcaster was acquitted and released from the courtroom in August 2019. Escape from the city. Almost immediately after his release, the young man hurriedly left his hometown and for about 6 months did not give any news of himself at all. This caused a storm of indignation among the relatives of the murdered girl because the case was not closed. The investigation continued, and the only suspect was simply released like this. In fact, letting him escape. As this unprecedentedly brutal case became publicized and its details were covered in the press for about 2 months, many residents of the city decided to express their support for the Montes family. People gathered at spontaneous rallies demanding to find Kevin and to reopen the case against him because he was clearly not telling something and the story he told was not believable. Salma's family and the activists who helped them succeeded in getting the investigation reopened, and a second search of the suspect's home revealed a hidden cache in the wall containing Kevin's bloody clothes and a large kitchen knife, which he had probably used to kill and then partially cut up his victim. Most likely he had not had time or was afraid to dispose of this evidence, believing that no one would find it in the stash. At almost the same time, Pilcaster, apparently following the advice of his lawyers, decided to make himself known and go on the attack. He didn't just make himself known. He filed a lawsuit against the Montes family, accusing them of slander, organizing his harassment, and tampering with evidence. The man said he was forced to leave town because he feared for his life because of the harassment organized by Soledad and Karen. In his opinion, the women had turned the entire town against him, and he was simply afraid of being lynched. As evidence, Kevin provided a mass of anonymous, threatening messages that he received on a daily basis, all because his personal information, including his phone number and email address, was published on the internet, as he assumed it was done by relatives of his ex-fiancée. He also claimed that he was being guarded under the house by unknown people who threatened to do away with him and his family. Following the gruesome discovery at the Pilcaster home, Kevin has once again become the prime suspect in the murder case and has once again been taken into custody. At the same time, the man and his lawyers insisted that the evidence was planted on him and also accused the Attorney General of collusion with the Montes family and the deliberate concealment of part of the CCTV footage, which allegedly could prove the innocence of the defendant and confirm his alibi. However, no such recordings were found because they simply did not exist. A new investigation and a protracted trial. Before Kevin could be taken back into custody, it was necessary to overturn his previous acquittal. This process was somewhat protracted because the judge did not want to admit his mistake and insisted that his decision was correct and only right. However, after several sessions, the verdict was overturned, after which a new case was started, taking into account the discovered evidence in this regard. Kevin's parents and grandmother decided to organize a real press conference, during which, answering questions from journalists, called their family members victims of the machinations of Soledad and Karen Montes. According to them, these women from the beginning were against the relationship between Kevin and Salma, while the pillcasters loved Salma with all their hearts and already considered her a member of their family. They also claimed that they were literally crushed by the news of the death of the failed daughter-in-law, and soon they were in for another shock when their son was accused of Salma's murder. The suspect himself in the interrogation did not hide the fact that they had a difficult relationship with the former lover and even confirmed that at times raised his hand on her. He justified his actions by the fact that Salma allegedly he cheated and he had the right to punish her. He also did not hide that he was annoyed when Salma broke off the engagement, which she, in his opinion, had no right to do because it offended him as a man. A new trial did not begin until June 20th, 2020. This time, Kevin was charged with kidnapping and aggravated brutal murder motivated by gender-based hate. In fact, he himself led the investigation to this conclusion, constantly repeating a woman had no right to act and speak like that. The collected evidence, including the bloody clothes and the knife, which was recognized as the murder weapon, as well as the testimony of witnesses, was enough to convict. And the story previously told by Kevin about Salma's new boyfriend, who, in his opinion, and was the real culprit, simply fell apart because there was no other guy in the parking lot or in the life of Salma. However, the prosecution requested time to complete the investigation, and the court agreed to grant the request. In this regard, it was decided to send the defendant for 6 months of pretrial detention in a maximum security prison. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the investigation into Salma's murder dragged on much longer than expected. Hearings were postponed again and again, and Kevin's 6-month pretrial detention eventually stretched to nearly 2 years. It wasn't until May 2023, just before the 4th anniversary of the crime, that the case finally returned to court. By then, prosecutors had gathered significant evidence, and several witnesses came forward. They testified that Kevin had repeatedly abused Salma during their relationship, beating her and controlling every aspect of her life. He treated her as his possession, unable to accept that she had chosen to leave him. On August 16, 2023, the court delivered its verdict. Kevin was found guilty of aggravated murder and desecration of a body. However, the charge of kidnapping was dismissed. The judge reasoned that since Salma had willingly agreed to meet Kevin and entered his car on her own, it could not be proven that she was abducted. Even so, the evidence presented in court was more than enough to secure a conviction. Kevin received a 70-year prison sentence, which, given that he was 32 years old at the time, effectively amounted to a life term. On top of that, he was ordered to pay the Montes family around $45,000 in moral damages. Salma's mother and sister later said they were satisfied with the verdict. Kevin, however, never admitted guilt, showed no remorse, and offered no explanation for his cruel and inhumane crime. Moving on to the next case. Shannon, Christian, and Christopher Newsom. You may have heard the saying that hesitation can be fatal. In today's story, that phrase became a grim reality. The delay and negligence of police officers cost the lives of 2 young people. During the trial, it was repeatedly argued that officers had simply followed protocol, waiting 24 hours after the missing persons report before acting. Yet it was within those very hours that the couple suffered a horrific fate, subjected to unimaginable cruelty. The case of Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom is remembered as one of the most shocking and brutal crimes in U.S. history. It horrified the nation twice, first in 2007 when the murders took place, and again in 2011 when the gang members' sentences were contested and appealed. Out of this lengthy legal battle emerged 2 significant laws, one prohibiting attorneys and defendants from portraying victims in a negative light, and another eliminating the requirement that a jury's unanimous verdict be approved by a judge. This tragic story revolves around 2 innocent victims and 5 ruthless perpetrators, with the entire crime sparked by nothing more than a robbery. To truly grasp the weight of this case, we must retrace the sequence of events, understand each criminal's role, and ask whether this devastating loss of young lives could have been prevented. So, who were Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom? Hugh Christopher Newsom Jr., known simply as Chris, was born on September 21, 1983, in Knoxville, Tennessee, to Mary and Hugh Newsom, growing up in a warm and loving family. As the youngest child, Chris was cherished deeply by his relatives. In his youth, he excelled in athletics, particularly baseball, and his coach once believed he had the potential for a promising future in the sport. Unfortunately, a serious injury and long recovery ended his athletic path. Still, Chris was gifted in many other ways. He was a talented artist, could play the guitar, had a knack for woodworking, and possessed strong knowledge of cars and motorcycles. Though Chris once dreamed of becoming a mechanic, his love for carpentry ultimately won out. After finishing high school, he enrolled at the University of Tennessee, where he proved to be a dedicated student and consistently ranked among the best in his class. Shannon Gale Christian, meanwhile, was born on April 29, 1985, in Nacogdoches, Texas, the youngest of two children to Dina and Gary Christian. She grew up alongside her older brother, Chase, with whom she shared a close and loving bond. Shannon's very existence was considered extraordinary. Dina had been diagnosed with infertility when she was younger, so the birth of both children was seen as nothing short of a miracle. In 1997, the family relocated to Knoxville, Tennessee, where Shannon and Chase attended local schools while their parents ran a small but successful business. Dina offered private psychotherapy sessions from their home, and Shannon, inspired by her mother's work, developed an interest in psychology herself. Bright, outgoing, and compassionate, she later pursued a degree in sociology at the University of Tennessee, working part-time to save for her dream of owning a car. With the support of her parents and brother, Shannon's dream of owning a car came true on her 21st birthday, when they helped her buy a silver Toyota 4Runner. Not long after, in 2006, she met Christopher on the university campus through mutual friends. At just 21, Shannon was full of life, while Chris was about to turn 23. Their connection was instant. It was love at first sight, and soon they became inseparable. Within a month, Chris introduced Shannon to his parents, openly expressing his wish to build a future with her. Shannon, equally devoted, brought Chris into her family circle, where he was warmly embraced. That October, both families gathered for an important dinner that marked the deepening of the couple's bond. Surrounded by their parents and siblings, the young pair spoke about their love and their intention to marry after finishing university. The evening was filled with happiness and optimism, none of them imagining the devastating tragedy that was just around the corner when the couple disappeared on their way to a party. On January 6, 2007, Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom were invited to celebrate a mutual friend's birthday. That Saturday, Shannon stopped by a beauty salon to get ready for the occasion, leaving her car in an underground garage where she and Chris planned to meet. Chris, however, was delayed, and the couple had a minor disagreement as they realized they were running late. When they never arrived at the party, their friends grew concerned. Because Shannon and Chris were known to be dependable, their absence without any explanation felt unusual and alarming. Repeated attempts to reach them on their phones went unanswered. Shannon's best friend, increasingly anxious, called her mother multiple times that night to check if everything was all right, but there was still no response. By the following morning, Shannon's mother, Dina, realized with dread that her daughter had never returned home. At first, Dina wasn't overly alarmed, thinking Shannon might have simply stayed the night at Chris's place after the party. Since Shannon had a work shift the next day, it seemed possible she had gone straight to work from there. But her worry grew when she noticed several missed calls from an unfamiliar number around midnight. When she returned the call, she heard the voice of Shannon's friend, who revealed that neither Shannon nor Chris had ever made it to the party and that attempts to reach them had failed. A wave of fear swept over Dina as she realized something could be terribly wrong with her daughter and her boyfriend. Both Shannon's and Chris's phones remained silent, and when Chris's parents were contacted, they too were surprised, assuming he had been with Shannon. Alarm deepened when it was discovered that Shannon hadn't shown up for her shift at work either. The families quickly reached out to the police, but the response offered little reassurance. Officers suggested the couple might have simply wanted time alone and lost track of it. Furthermore, protocol dictated that an adult could only be officially considered missing after 24 hours without contact, leaving the desperate parents to wait through those critical early hours. For Shannon and Chris, those 24 hours proved to be crucial. Unwilling to sit idle, their families and friends launched their own search. They reached out to everyone they knew, checked hospitals, handed out flyers with the couple's photos, and created social media pages pleading for information. Despite their relentless efforts, no solid leads emerged. The last confirmed sighting of Shannon was at the beauty salon on Saturday, where her hairstylist recalled her chatting only about the party and mentioning no other plans along the way. It wasn't until Monday, January 8th, that police finally began an official search for the missing couple. By then, the tireless work of their families and friends had already made the case widely known across the city. A day earlier, on Sunday, unsettling rumors had begun circulating, claims of a gruesome discovery near the railroad tracks. At the time, however, no one had been able to confirm the details. A railroad worker inspecting the tracks in his assigned area stumbled upon what appeared to be severely damaged human remains on the embankment alongside the tracks. The body was in a horrific state with multiple injuries and had been doused with a flammable liquid in an attempt to burn it. The police responding to the scene cordoned off the area and conducted a thorough examination. However, they were unable to find any significant clues or leads. After taking necessary photographs, the remains were sent to the morgue for an autopsy to determine the cause of death and to attempt identification, though it was clear that the extensive damage and effects of the fire would make this difficult. Forensic experts determined that the body belonged to a young man who had suffered a brutal death. The victim had multiple injuries inflicted while he was alive, indicating prolonged and severe assault. Almost all of his teeth had been knocked out or damaged by blows. He had been shot 3 times, twice in the back and a final fatal shot to the head. Additionally, traces of seminal fluid from at least 3 different men were found in his body, along with distinctive tears suggesting repeated violent assaults. When police checked recent reports of missing young men, Christopher Newsom fit the description in age, height, and build. The officers contacted his parents and requested DNA samples for confirmation, but strongly advised against personal identification at the morgue as the burnt remains barely resembled human features. Unfortunately, the DNA analysis confirmed that the body belonged to the missing student, Newsom. The search for Shannon. Despite the distressing news about Christopher, Shannon Christian's parents still clung to the hope that their daughter was alive, possibly being held somewhere. Her mobile phone was last pinged on the day the couple disappeared in one of Knoxville's more troubled neighborhoods, a place they wouldn't have visited by choice. This indicated that they were likely brought there against their will, and Shannon might still be held in the area. In a secluded alley of this neighborhood, Shannon's Toyota 4Runner was found abandoned. It was in a terrible state, so much so that Dina and Gary Christian hardly recognized their daughter's car. The SUV was dirty, scratched, with broken headlights and deflated tires. All of Shannon's personal belongings were missing from the car, which was littered with cigarette butts, and the seats were torn and stained. The driver's seat was pushed far back, suggesting that a large adult male had been the last one to drive it. A crumpled envelope with the address 2316 Chipman Street was found on the floor between the seats, likely dropped by the perpetrator. A local witness reported seeing 4 African-American males driving the SUV that Saturday evening, a vehicle that stood out in that area. Fingerprints on the envelope led the police to Lamarcus Davidson, previously convicted for serious offenses. His residence, located in an industrial area near a wasteland, lacked witnesses. When no one responded to the police's knock and offered to surrender, they forced entry, hoping to find Shannon alive inside. Inside the house, they found Shannon's purse, a stuffed toy from her car, as well as Christopher's headphones and baseball cap. A knife with blood traces, torn and blood-stained fragments of women's clothing, and Shannon's lifeless body were discovered in the house's trash chute system, hidden under dirty sheets. She was bound in the fetal position and wrapped in 5 trash bags. Experts later concluded that she likely passed away in the early hours of Monday, January 8th. This tragic finding suggested that if the police had begun their search immediately after the missing persons report, rather than waiting for 24 hours, Shannon might have been saved. A horrific state of suffering. The condition of Shannon Christian's body was a horrifying sight even for seasoned forensic experts, as there was not a single untouched area on her. Shannon was covered from head to toe with bruises, abrasions, cuts, and cigarette burns. The numerous tears and injuries to her genital area, as well as her oral cavity and throat, indicated that she had been subjected to multiple assaults by several men. Shannon sustained a serious head injury and internal bleeding in the abdominal area, likely resulting from being kicked. Furthermore, the merciless assailants inflicted several penetrating, though not fatal, stab wounds on her and extinguished dozens of cigarettes on her skin. In a brutal attempt to destroy DNA evidence on her body, the perpetrators doused her with household bleach, paying particular attention to bleeding wounds and her genital area. She was also forcibly made to ingest bleach. After these torturous acts, Shannon, still alive, was wrapped in 5 trash bags and then shoved into a household trash chute covered with sheets and rags. She slowly suffocated and bled to death, helplessly trapped with no chance of escape or calling for help. 5 merciless perpetrators. Lamarcus Davidson, in whose house the mutilated body of Shannon Christian and personal belongings of the deceased Christopher Newsom were found, was immediately declared a fugitive. The police also tracked down another suspect, Eric Boyd, whose traces were found at the crime scene. Boyd was apprehended on January 11th, without resistance, and agreed to cooperate with the investigation, claiming he wouldn't go to prison for crimes he didn't commit. Boyd revealed that Davidson was hiding in a vacant house listed for sale and personally led the police to the location. Davidson, unprepared for this turn of events, was caught off guard and offered no resistance. Notably, at the time of his arrest, Davidson was wearing sneakers that had belonged to the deceased student. During interrogations, Davidson tried to minimize his role, portraying himself as a victim. He claimed that the couple had come to his house looking to buy banned substances, but were caught up in a conflict with his acquaintances. Davidson insisted that he left to avoid involvement, and the subsequent brutal acts occurred in his absence. Further interrogations revealed 3 more individuals involved in the case: Davidson's friend, George Thomas, his half-brother, LaTalvis Cobbins, and an 18-year-old woman named Vanessa Lynn Coleman. Once all 5 suspects were in custody, they were placed in separate cells and interrogated individually. Each tried to deflect blame onto the others, inadvertently revealing details of the heinous crime. Their fragmented accounts helped piece together the event's chronology and each perpetrator's role in the brutal act. A timeline of tragic events. Lamarcus Davidson, who had been released from prison on parole just a few months before these events, was desperately in need of money. He was involved in the sale of banned substances and urgently required a vehicle to deliver these to his customers. Davidson decided to steal a car from an underground parking lot, known for its lack of surveillance cameras, and headed there with his accomplices. Tragically, at that moment, students Shannon and Christopher were in the parking lot, arguing over Chris's delay. The criminals, deciding to leave no witnesses, forced the couple into the trunk of a car at gunpoint. The pair was taken to Davidson's house, where they were brutally beaten and repeatedly assaulted. After midnight, a barefoot and undressed Christopher was again forced into the trunk and taken to the railroad tracks. He was ordered to walk on the stones before being shot twice in the back. His torment was ended with a final shot to the head. His body was then doused with a flammable liquid and set on fire in hopes of destroying any evidence that could lead to the perpetrators. Having dealt with Newsom, the criminals returned to the house where Shannon remained bound. She endured horrific cruelty the next day, leaving her without a single uninjured area on her body. The sadists concluded their torture by dousing her with bleach and packing her, still alive, into plastic trash bags, where she slowly suffocated. The exact moment when young Vanessa Coleman joined the group was unclear. During interrogations, she claimed to be a hostage herself, participating in the torture out of fear for her life. However, Boyd indicated that Coleman was Davidson's girlfriend and willingly participated in the events, even taking some of Shannon's jewelry and mobile phone. Further, a personal diary found at Vanessa's home contained her descriptions of the horrors at her boyfriend's house, which she referred to as an exciting adventure. The initial trials and sentences. During the investigation, it was established that Lamarcus Davidson, born in 1981, was the leader of the criminal group and the primary instigator of the brutal acts against the innocent victims. Davidson tried to deflect blame and downplay his role in the atrocities, attempting to shift responsibility onto the deceased themselves. Davidson claimed that the couple came to his house to buy banned substances and later suggested engaging in rough intimacy with him and his friends, a situation he said spiraled out of control. Remarkably, the defendant's lawyers latched onto this version, attempting to tarnish the reputations of the deceased in court. The parents of the victims later expressed immense emotional anguish over these claims. Nevertheless, Davidson was found guilty on 40 counts, including assault, kidnapping, robbery, and particularly cruel and premeditated termination of life, among others. The jury unanimously decided that Davidson deserved the death penalty for his heinous acts. Latalvis Cobbins, born in 1982, faced the death penalty for his role in the torture, assaults, and involvement in the termination of life. However, he was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. George Thomas, born in 1983, received a similar life sentence for his involvement in the same crimes with no chance of release. Eric Boyd, considering his cooperation with the investigation and assistance in capturing Davidson, was sentenced to 18 years of imprisonment. The relatives of both victims found this sentence outrageously lenient. As for Vanessa Coleman, born in 1988, the only female participant in the atrocities, the investigation proved her involvement in the torture, assaults, and in Shannon's tragic end. She was sentenced to 53 years in prison. Overturned verdicts and new hearings in 2011 while the criminals were serving their sentences and Davidson awaited execution, the case took an unexpected turn. The presiding judge resigned, admitting to a substance dependency. His ability to conduct trials was questioned and his verdicts over the last 2 years were annulled, leading to new hearings, including the case of Christian and Newsom. A new judge scheduled hearings for all 5 individuals involved in the student's tragic end. After the retrials, Davidson's sentence remained unchanged. Death penalty. Cobbins continued to serve his life sentence without the possibility of parole. Thomas, however, received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 51 years. Vanessa Coleman's sentence was reduced from the original 53 years to 35 years. Her appeal in 2014 was rejected and parole was denied in 2017. In 2020, the parole board decided she would remain incarcerated at least until April 2032. Eric Boyd's situation changed most dramatically. Originally receiving a relatively short sentence for cooperating with the investigation, his involvement in the assaults and tragic end of both victims was later proven. His retrial resulted in a life sentence without parole, with his accomplice Thomas testifying against him, revealing previously unknown details about Boyd's role. For his testimony, Thomas, who initially had the possibility of parole after 51 years, had his sentence reduced by 15%, contingent on good behavior. Boyd's attempts to appeal his new sentence were unsuccessful. He is currently serving his sentence in the Bledsoe County Correctional Complex. Davidson remains in the maximum security Riverbend institution, awaiting the execution of his death sentence. Public reaction and the case's impact. As previously mentioned, this trial garnered significant attention, widely covered in the press, and leading to the enactment of 2 laws. The first was aimed at protecting victims from defamation, attempts to shift blame onto them, and portraying them negatively. This was in response to the defense strategy of the accused and their lawyers, who tried to label the students as drug users and thrill seekers in a troubled neighborhood. These claims were completely false and caused immense pain and suffering to the victims' families. The second law eliminated the need for a judge's signature on a jury's unanimous verdict, which, if in place during this case, could have prevented the need for retrials and sentence reviews. The house at 2316 Chipman Street, which became a torture chamber for the young couple, was demolished in the fall of 2008. A memorial was erected on the site in honor of Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. In memory of Christian, a golf tournament and a Christian charity foundation were established, providing support to victims of violence. Similarly, a foundation in Newsom's name was created, holding annual memorial baseball tournaments at Halls Park and awarding a scholarship named after the deceased student and former baseball player. It is worth noting that despite the widespread public attention, the media initially misreported several details of the case, whether by mistake or design. Many observers believe the inconsistencies in coverage, along with the delays, were influenced by racial factors, since the victims were white and the perpetrators were African American. Yet, the president of the Association of Criminal Writers and Editors remarked that it could not be stated with certainty that the case would have gained more attention if the situation were reversed, with 5 white suspects accused of such crimes against 2 black victims. Similarly, the Knoxville police chief affirmed that there was no evidence the attacks had been motivated by racial hatred. Moving on to the next case. Susanna Morales. 16-year-old Susanna Morales left her home on July 26th, telling her sister she was on her way back. But as hours slipped by, she never returned. Her phone went silent, and it was as if she had vanished without a trace. For weeks, there were no answers, until her body was tragically discovered in a shocking and grim location. Her disappearance left the community filled with fear and unanswered questions. Who had taken her? What had happened in her final moments? And most unsettling of all, was the perpetrator still out there? Susanna, a high school student who loved spending time with her friends, had gone to the Sterling Glen apartments that night to meet up. On her way home, what should have been an ordinary walk became her final journey. When Susanna failed to return home that night, her family grew alarmed and quickly filed a missing persons report. As hours stretched into days and then months, police, friends, and loved ones devoted themselves to uncovering what had happened. They used every tool at their disposal, even the Life 360 app, which gave them insight into her final movements. Despite their relentless search, Susanna's whereabouts remained unknown for months, leaving the community gripped by fear and uncertainty. Then, in a heartbreaking development, her body was discovered in a rural area off Highway 316. The discovery raised even more troubling questions. How had she died? And who was responsible? Susanna Morales, just a high school student from Norcross, Georgia, had her life tragically cut short in her small Gwinnett County town. At just 16 years old, Susanna Morales was remembered by her family and friends as a warm, kind, and energetic young girl. She was deeply connected to her loved ones, and her friends admired her gentle nature and uplifting spirit. Known for her positivity and the way she could brighten someone's day, Susanna left a lasting impact on everyone she met. While she was close to her entire family, her strongest bonds were with her mother and sister, who never stopped searching for her after she disappeared. The last sighting of Susanna was at the Sterling Glen apartment complex, a familiar hangout spot where she often spent time with friends. That evening, she had been with her best friend Esmeralda Castillo and Esmeralda's boyfriend, Axel Zaragoza. They recalled that Susanna had been in high spirits, enjoying herself before she began her walk home. At the time, Susanna had also been dating Axel for a few months, making her disappearance even more devastating for those close to her. They had spoken on FaceTime several times that day, and nothing seemed unusual in their conversations. Later, Axel shared how thoughtful Susanna was, describing her unique way of making people feel valued and loved. On the evening of July 26, 2022, Susanna set out for home. The walk from the Sterling Glen apartments to her house was less than 2 miles, a route she took regularly, so at first there was no cause for concern. Everything appeared perfectly normal when she began her journey. Surveillance cameras later captured her walking down the street near the apartment complex, the final time she was seen alive. Familiar with the neighborhood, Susanna had no reason to think anything would go wrong. But within hours, her family and friends grew worried when their calls went unanswered. At first, they held on to hope that she might have stayed with friends or simply lost track of time. As the hours went by and she hadn't called, worry set in. Susanna's mother, Maria Brand, became worried when she didn't come home and started calling her friends right away to find out where she was. As the night went on, the family's worry grew. By morning, it was clear that something very bad was going on. Esmeralda Castillo. To try to find Susanna, her best friend also started talking to people they both knew. Castillo said Susanna had left the apartment building as planned, and there were no signs she was going somewhere else. Susanna's family and friends used the Life 360 app to find her and saw that she was miles away from where she was supposed to be, near Highway 316. This made them even more worried because it meant she had gotten lost and ended up far from where she was supposed to be. Unfortunately, Susanna's family and friends quickly told everyone about her disappearance and searched for any clues that could lead to her safe return. However, no real leads were found, and the mystery of what happened to Susanna Morales remained unsolved. People in a quiet suburban neighborhood were shocked when a smart young girl went missing, and their fears about her safety grew each day even though police searched the places where her phone last registered. After Susanna Morales went missing on July 26, 2022, her family and friends worked hard for months to figure out what happened that terrible night when she didn't come home. The Morales family was filled with fear and doubt. Susanna's mother, Maria Brand, and sister, Jasmine Perez, were very helpful in the search. They did everything they could to get Susanna home safely, working with the police and people in the area. It was hard on the family's emotions as they kept calling the police, following every lead, and holding on to the hope that Susanna might still be alive. During the long period of uncertainty, family and friends utilized the Life 360 app to gather more information about Susanna's whereabouts. The app revealed that her phone was last seen near Highway 316, which is a very remote area and completely out of character. Despite this lead, weeks and months passed without any significant progress. Police and volunteers continued to search the area surrounding her in the hopes of finding any signs that could lead them to her. Susanna's mother spoke deeply, praying for her daughter's safe return and requesting everyone's assistance with the search. Everyone was under a great deal of stress during this period. The case's detectives also felt strongly about it. The Gwinnett County Police Department's Lieutenant Xavier Biggers was deeply involved in the case and spent countless hours searching for any and all leads. Eventually, he broke down in court, expressing his unwavering determination to return Susanna home. This demonstrated the closeness he had developed with the family during the investigation. Despite Biggers' tireless efforts, the family remained in a painful state of limbo for 7 months with no clear direction or answers. Their fears and worries intensified as time passed. Something terrible happened to the study on February 6, 2023. Someone walking near Highway 316 in Dicula, Georgia, found bones in the woods off to the side of the road in a rural area. It was about 20 miles from the Sterling Glen apartment complex, which is where Susanna was last seen. The body of Susanna Morales was quickly identified, ending the sad months-long search. It hurt her family and the people who had come together to help them during the search. As soon as police arrived at the scene, they began gathering evidence to try to figure out how her body got there and what happened in her last moments. It was now up to the police to figure out what happened to Susanna in the hours after she went missing. Investigators had been thinking for months that there was foul play, and now they knew for sure. At the scene, they also found important clues that linked the bodies to the larger investigation. Along with Susanna's body, they found clues that pointed to a possible weapon being used, which made it even harder to figure out how she got to such a remote place and who killed her. As they looked into Susanna Morales' death and disappearance, the police were determined to find out who did this horrible crime. At first, there weren't any clear suspects, so they followed a lot of different leads, but things started to look up when they put together important pieces of evidence that led them to suspect Miles. Brian was a police officer from Doraville who lived near where Morales was last seen. People became suspicious after seeing that Morales' family used the Life 360 app to track her last movements. The app showed that Morales' phone had been close to Bryant's apartment complex before it finally went off miles away, near the woods where her body was found months later. This information put Bryant near important places linked to Morales' disappearance, which made detectives even more suspicious of Bryant's strange behavior, even more so than the position information. Brian's actions in the days after Morales went missing raised red flags. Brian's Glock 19 personal gun was stolen the day after Morales went missing. At first glance, this may not seem to have anything to do with the reported stolen gun, but investigators found Brian's behavior suspicious. He said that his gun had been stolen from his open car, but he didn't seem very interested in finding out what happened. Detectives were puzzled by his lack of concern for getting a weapon and the fact that he was close to where Morales went missing, what Avon said in court. During the hearing, Brand's ex-girlfriend Avon said that Bryant had been acting strangely around the time that Morales went missing. She said that Bryant ignored her the night Morales went missing, and later, she saw scratches on his truck and a broken mirror that detectives thought might have been related to a fight involving Morales. This gave investigators more reason to focus on Bryant as a suspect. As the investigation went on, they learned that Bryant had met Morales and her friends before. It was said that Bryant offered Morales and her friend a ride home again, but they turned him down. And more evidence pointed to Bryant's involvement in Susanna Morales' death, along with his past interactions with Morales. In early 2023, after months of investigating, Miles Bryant was finally arrested on charges related to her death. At first, Bryant was charged with concealing Morales' death and falsely reporting a crime because of his suspicious report of a gun theft. As more evidence came in, the charges against him were raised to include murder and theft. The fact that he was close to the crime scene made him look suspicious, and there was strong evidence of what he did while Morales was missing, which helped build the case against him. People were shocked when they learned that Bryant, a police officer they trusted, was involved in such a horrible crime. Bryant, who had sworn to serve and protect, was now being blamed for one of the worst things to happen in the area in recent years. Miles Bryant, a retired police officer in Doryville, was charged with kidnapping and killing 16-year-old Susanna Morales. His trial began in June 2024 after months of research and emotional statements from Morales' family, friends, and law enforcement officers. Everyone was working to get Morales justice. At the beginning of the trial, Bryant's acts in the days after Morales went missing and the evidence that finally linked him to the crime were looked at in great detail. Parts of the trial were when Morales' family, especially her mother Maria Brand, talked about how painful it was to lose her daughter and how unclear it was for months before her body was found. Brand's statement set the tone for the trial. She told heartbreaking details about how her family served Susanna and eventually realized she would never come home. Jasmine Perez Morales' sister also said that the Life 360 app was used to track down Morales' phone and find out where it was when it was last heard. Bryant's ex-girlfriend also testified against him and said bad things about him that made the case against him even stronger. During Ava Smyer's testimony, she talked about how strange he was acting around the time Morales went missing, the scratches on his truck, and how he kept giving different reasons. This made Bryant's behavior and character even more complicated. During the trial, several police detectives gave their evidence. Gwinnett County Police Lieutenant Xavier Biggers, who led the investigation, had a very moving moment. In court, Biggers broke down in tears as he talked about how hard he worked to find Morales and how the case made him feel. Other cops also gave very important evidence and talked to Bryant during the investigation. The prosecution showed a lot of evidence that Bryant was involved in Morales' death and disappearance. One important piece was information from the Life 360 app that showed Bryant was close to where Morales' body was found. This shows that Bryant was in the area at a very important time and goes against his claim that he had nothing to do with her death. Bryant's supposedly stolen gun was also a big part of the trial. The police thought it was strange that Bryant reported his gun stolen just one day after Morales went missing. People were even less sure they could trust Bryant because he didn't seem very interested in continuing the investigation into the theft. Bryant's contradictory statements about the missing gun made it seem like someone was trying to hide the fact that he was involved in a major crime. There was also forensic evidence from the scene where Morales' body was found, and witnesses who had seen him close to where Morales was last seen. At the end of several days of deliberation, the jury decided that Miles Bryant was guilty of several serious charges. He was found guilty of murder with intent, illegal murder, kidnapping, and lying about a crime. These results showed that the jury thought Bryant had not only killed Morales, but also tried to hide the crime by telling police that his gun had been stolen when it wasn't. However, Bryant was found not guilty of attempted rape because the prosecution could not show it. Bryant was given a life sentence without the chance of parole for beyond a reasonable doubt. This was the end of a case that had a big effect on the Morales family and the community. For Susanna's family, the loss of a cherished daughter and sister left an unfillable void. The trial brought an end to months of pain and uncertainty, but the heartbreak of her death remained. Susanna's tragic fate is a stark reminder of how vulnerable people can be, even in places that seem safe. The revelation that Miles Bryant, a trusted police officer, was responsible for her death shocked the entire community. His betrayal of trust left both her family and the town deeply scarred. Susanna Morales' story must be remembered, not only because of the life she lived, but also because she became a victim of violence against women. The betrayal by someone entrusted with public safety made the tragedy even more devastating. Honoring Susanna means turning her story into a call for action, working to protect those most vulnerable, and holding public servants to the highest ethical standards. By doing so, we can strive to prevent such violence from happening again and ensure her memory inspires change. Moving on to the next case. Tara Baker, a university student, returned home from the library one night and was never seen again. From the very beginning, the investigation revealed a series of unsettling, strange, and even shocking details, clues that would eventually spark a change in state law. Yet, despite all of this, the truth remained hidden for decades, until the case was finally solved in 2024. Tara Baker was born on January 20th, 1977, in East Point, Georgia. After her parents divorced, her mother later remarried, and Tara became the eldest of 4 siblings, with 2 brothers and a sister. From an early age, she had a strong fascination with the legal system and dreamed of becoming either a lawyer or a judge. She staged mock trials with her stuffed animals, drafted playful contracts for family members, and frequently wrote letters to politicians. In fact, she once wrote to the President of the United States, complaining that one of his televised speeches had interrupted her favorite TV show. After finishing high school, Tara enrolled at Georgia College, where she graduated early in just 3 years, earning 2 bachelor's degrees. In 1999, she continued her education at the University of Georgia, one of the nation's top law schools, located in the small town of Athens. Since the University of Georgia was only a few hours' drive from her parents' home, it felt like the perfect choice for Tara. Not wanting to return to dorm life after college, she opted instead to rent off-campus housing. The house was divided into 3 separate units, 2 of which were occupied by other students, one of them a close friend from college. For a while, Tara also worked at a respected law firm in downtown Athens. The job not only covered her living expenses, but also gave her valuable hands-on experience in her chosen field. By January 2001, Tara was 23 and in her 2nd year of law school. She often spent long evenings studying at the university library, and January 18th was no exception. That night, she and a friend studied together for several hours before her friend left around 7:30 p.m. Tara chose to stay behind, and at about 9:46 p.m., she called to make sure her friend had gotten home safely. During the call, she mentioned that she would be leaving the library shortly. The following day, around 6 p.m., Tara's mother, Virginia Baker, received a strange phone call. The caller identified themselves as a detective and asked whether her daughter had ever been arrested, explaining that they needed her fingerprints. At first, Virginia assumed it was a prank and hung up, but moments later, she decided to call the Athens police station to confirm. To Virginia's shock, the Athens police confirmed she had indeed spoken with a real detective and explained that a fire had broken out at Tara's house. Still struggling to grasp the situation, she asked to speak with her daughter. The detective told her they couldn't find Tara and that an unidentified body had been discovered inside the home, hence the need for her fingerprints. He added that only one of Tara's roommates had been located, and she had not been home when the fire started. The other roommate and Tara were still unaccounted for, and investigators suspected the body could belong to either of them. When Virginia asked for a description of the room where the body had been found, the detective's response left her stunned. He said the space was filled with antiques, items Tara had been collecting for years. Fearing the worst but clinging to hope, Tara's family rushed to Athens, praying it was all a misunderstanding. At the police station, however, they were left waiting for hours with no answers. Finally, a detective came out and confirmed their nightmare. The body was indeed Tara's. She hadn't died in the fire, she had been murdered. To make matters worse, the detective ended the conversation abruptly, saying he was too tired to answer their questions. Before leaving, the detective mentioned one final detail, that Tara had left behind a vital clue. Under her fingernails, forensic experts had found fragments belonging to the attacker, which could one day help identify him. For Tara's family, already reeling from the shock of her murder, this news only deepened their confusion and grief. Despite their desperate pleas, police refused to share any further details. From that point on, the local police never proactively reached out to the family. Instead, Tara's relatives were forced to call and visit the station repeatedly, begging for updates. Slowly, through persistence, they managed to piece together fragments of what had happened. On the morning of January 19th, around 11 a.m., firefighters had been dispatched to Tara's home. Once the fire was extinguished, they discovered a body inside, later confirmed to be Tara. The medical examiner determined that Tara had been murdered. Her body bore evidence of strangulation and stab wounds, and signs suggested she had likely been assaulted. Investigators believe the fire had been deliberately set afterward in an attempt to destroy evidence. Yet, even with these findings, Tara's parents were never allowed to see the official medical examiner's report or receive detailed information about how their daughter's life had been taken. Tara's family also learned that many pieces of evidence might have been destroyed by the firefighters, which is not uncommon in such cases. Their primary goal was to extinguish the blaze and potentially rescue any survivors, and they couldn't have known that there was a murder victim inside. The family also discovered that the investigators likely didn't secure the house after finding the body, allowing anyone to approach or even enter the crime scene. As Tara's relatives gathered these pieces of information, they not only encountered the police's reluctance to keep them informed about the investigation, but also faced constant rudeness and unprofessionalism. At one point, they even started recording their conversations with the police and filed complaints against the local investigators. But this led nowhere. They eventually decided to conduct their own investigation and reached out to a well-known criminologist who agreed to help them. However, the local police department agreed to show him the case materials only on the condition that he would not share any information or findings with anyone outside the investigation, including Tara's relatives. The family hadn't been able to obtain Tara's death certificate for 10 years. It was only after writing to the state governor that they finally received the document. But even then, the detailed cause of death was not listed. It simply stated multiple injuries. Despite all this, the police did continue their investigation, although there were many questionable moments in their actions, which we'll discuss a bit later. When firefighters extinguished the blaze and discovered Tara's body, they called the police. Realizing it was a murder, investigators searched for evidence at the crime scene, but the room was severely damaged by fire and water. As the family later found out, some surviving items were never examined for fingerprints. The police were able to determine that Tara's laptop was missing from her room. Considering it was 2001, laptop was quite a bulky piece of tech, yet no other valuable items were taken. This raised doubts about the robbery gone wrong motive. There were no signs of forced entry, leading investigators to believe that might have known her killer and let them involuntarily, although the fire and firefighting efforts had damaged the crime scene so much that it was difficult to be certain. Both of Tara's roommates were out of town that evening, so she was home alone. Establishing the time of death was challenging, so medical experts estimated a time frame from 10 p.m. when Tara left the library to 11 a.m. when neighbors called the fire department. The crime likely occurred closer to the morning hours since the fire didn't need much time to spread. The police also found witnesses who saw a middle-aged white man running down the street that morning. He was only wearing a t-shirt and jeans, which was odd given the fact it was winter. They soon found out about a phone call to Tara's university a few days before the murder. The university had a number for requesting student information, like phone numbers, which was used by students themselves or faculty. A man, sounding heavily intoxicated, called and asked for Tara Baker's phone number. He only managed to write it correctly on the 8th attempt. While this was highly suspicious, the man's identity was never determined. At the time of her murder, Tara had a boyfriend who became a person of interest from the very beginning. He provided an alibi that was confirmed, yet the police were reluctant to remove him from their list of suspects. Even after verifying his alibi, they treated him with suspicion, calling him and his parents in the middle of the night and demanding that he come to the station in another city to provide additional biological samples, answer questions, or undergo a polygraph test. It's worth mentioning that it was Tara's boyfriend who had to identify her. He lived in another city and came to Athens immediately upon hearing about the fire. Although Tara's parents were already in town, the police asked the boyfriend to identify her. They brought him directly to the house, but he wasn't allowed inside. Instead, a police officer went in, took a photograph of the body, and showed it to him on the camera screen. Shocked, he said he couldn't be sure if it was Tara. He then mentioned that he had given her earrings, and if he saw them, he could be certain. The officer went back inside, removed the earrings from the body, and showed them to him. Only after that, the boyfriend confirmed they belonged to Tara. The police soon focused their attention on another individual, a student who attended the same classes as Tara and had a troubling reputation. Several female students came forward, saying that he repeatedly asked various girls out on dates, and often didn't take no for an answer. He had also asked Tara out multiple times, even though she had been telling him that she had a boyfriend. Some girls also mentioned that this person scared them with his creepy behavior and made them feel uncomfortable. Detectives began to investigate him, but they couldn't find any evidence linking him to the crime. At one point, they even asked Tara's friend to keep an eye on him, which was a quite controversial move, but it led nowhere. Another suspect was an attorney who worked at the same company as Tara. Talking to her colleagues, investigators found out that shortly before the murder, the man began acting quite strangely. In their company, there was a close-knit group of employees who socialized outside of work pretty often. At some point, this attorney suddenly quit their group. Moreover, just a few days before the incident, he told Tara that he wouldn't be able to attend her birthday celebration, which was scheduled the day after the murder. On the morning of January 19th, before the fire started, one of Tara's colleagues decided to try and convince him to come to the celebration since Tara considered him a good friend and she was hurt by his sudden decision. The colleague went to his office, but he wasn't there. Considering that his workday had already begun, this was strange. He had always been present at the office in the mornings, but on that particular day, it wasn't the case. The colleague also checked his work schedule, thinking he might have meetings, but it was empty. He didn't show up that day, but the next day, he went to another colleague's house and behaved quite strangely. Many people who knew him suspected that he regularly used illicit substances, which could have explained his behavior. But there was more. The colleague noticed several fresh scratches on his neck. As we remember, skin particles from the perpetrator were found under Tara's nails, which meant that she had probably scratched her attacker. The attorney claimed he was scratched by a cat and denied any involvement in Tara's murder. However, when asked who he thought committed the crime, he acted quite oddly. He started shouting that it was her father, but provided no explanation to support this claim. Another weird thing was that the attorney suddenly resigned just a few months after the murder and left the state. It's unknown whether the police compared his DNA with the samples found under the victim's nails. Moreover, for all these years, there has been no information about whether these samples were even examined. Like with all other parts of the investigation, detectives didn't share any information, not even with Tara's relatives. The police later found out that the attorney was secretly dating two female colleagues from the company, despite being married. This could have explained his strange behavior and absence from work without apparent reasons. Both of these women also claimed they were sure he was using illegal substances. The police weren't able to find any evidence linking him to the murder, and eventually, they stopped considering him a suspect. Detectives also looked into the employees of the maintenance company associated with the house, where Tara rented a room. They had spare keys, which could have explained the absence of signs of forced entry. They couldn't find any leads there either. Since then, there had been no significant progress in the case. The police continued to search for new suspects and witnesses while keeping most details of the investigation in secret, insisting that releasing such information could harm their efforts. Over time, they received several more potential leads. One witness reported seeing an African-American man outside Tara's house a few hours before the fire. Another mentioned seeing blood on a university classmate's notebook shortly after the murder. Police investigated both leads, but they didn't lead anywhere. Tara's parents raised $27,000 and offered it as a reward for any information that could help solve the case. Over the years, almost all detectives working on the case changed. The new team continued their efforts to crack the case, but there were no new breakthroughs. The main issue was the lack of evidence, as the fire and the firefighters' actions destroyed almost everything inside Tara's room that could have been of interest to the investigation. In 2020, 19 years after Tara's murder, a podcast emerged shedding light on her case. Alongside Tara's family and other people involved in the case, this podcast gathered all available information about the crime, sparking a new wave of interest. The police department also took notice of the podcast, leading to increased communication between the new detectives and Tara's family. Thanks to that, the police began working on the case more thoroughly, but there was still no progress. The podcast episodes dedicated to Tara aired for 2 years, significantly impacting the fate of the case. It became one of the reasons why Georgia's government came up with a bill aimed at reducing the number of unsolved cases in state. This bill was named after Tara and another young woman from Georgia, whose murder remained unsolved. 18-year-old Rhonda Coleman was found dead in 1990, and her killer has not been found to this day. Even though Rhonda's murder was clearly unrelated to Tara's death, it was decided to name this initiative the Coleman-Baker Bill. In 2023, the bill unanimously passed, and the governor of Georgia came to Athens to sign it in the presence of the families of both victims. The law aimed to establish an unsolved cases unit within the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. It also empowered the family of the victims to request the police to review unsolved cases, re-examine evidence, and take other steps to solve them. As soon as the law was signed in 2023, such a unit was established, specifically focusing on Tara's murder. Detectives reviewed all available information and began examining the few pieces of evidence utilizing modern DNA analysis tools. This went on for several months, until May 13, 2024, when the police called a press conference. After 23 years since the murder, they announced that the perpetrator had finally been arrested. The culprit turned out to be a 48-year-old man named Edric Faust. During the conference, investigators didn't disclose how exactly they identified the suspect, only mentioning that modern DNA analysis tools and other biological evidence played a crucial role. They refrained from revealing all details to avoid compromising the ongoing legal proceedings, and only at trial would they disclose what evidence they have against Faust. In Faust's arrest documents, among other charges, he was accused of assaulting the victim, so his biological material could have matched the DNA sample from Tara's body. As we also recall, traces of the assailant's skin were found under the victim's nails, and it's possible that modern tools allowed experts to extract the killer's DNA from it. As for Faust, he likely should have been in the FBI database for a long time due to his extensive criminal record, including numerous arrests for various offenses. At the time of Tara's murder, the suspect was 25 and living in the same city. However, police reported that they found no evidence he had personally known her, suggesting instead that Faust may have either broken into her home or gained entry by convincing her to let him in under some pretense. Detectives also disclosed that Faust had never been considered a suspect during the original investigation. He only came under suspicion days before his arrest, when advanced DNA analysis techniques pointed directly to him. Faust is currently in jail awaiting trial, and the full scope of the evidence against him will be revealed in court. What is already clear, however, is that detectives obtained DNA evidence strong enough to deny him bail. Authorities are confident that Faust is responsible for Tara's murder, and with his arrest, her case has been officially closed. For Tara's family, who spent 23 long years searching for answers, the news finally brought them closure. They expressed gratitude to the new team of detectives who solved the case. Meanwhile, the family of Rhonda Coleman, the other young woman whose tragic death helped inspire the state law change, remains without answers. Yet, with Tara's case finally resolved, they now have reason to hope that investigators might one day uncover the evidence needed to hold Rhonda's killer accountable as well. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.